Welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Krayden. I promise I'll be back on Sunday, and it's a bit of a surprise. I know you can't wait, but I'll be back in a few moments.
So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need the resolve to resist.
Yes, Sasha the cat says, ring that bell. And like us right now if you can, because that helps us to overwhelm and overcome that YouTube algorithm we all know about. And yes, ring the bell. It helps us beat Trudeau's censorship because you get notifications when the show is on the air. So that's very important. Support us in any way you can. We'd appreciate it. I don't like to ask, but there's many ways you can do that, and you can find out how to do so in the description, and I'll leave that to you. But I thank you so much for putting us over 15,000. We were there, then we lost some mysteriously overnight on December 31st. We hit 15,000 before New Year's Eve, midnight New Year's Eve. But we're back up again. We're over 15,100 now. So I don't know what we're going to do this year. I don't have an objective yet in terms of final numbers, but I'll let you know when I do. So thank you again, though, for your support. And financially, so many of you have given support, but just for subscribing, telling your friends and family about this, because I think we're offering a product here that is not only as good as a lot of other commentators are offering, but I think it's better because I'm proud of the fact that I do original content for you. I get out there, I interview people, I give you the news. I don't sit in my basement and predict that Justin Trudeau is going to implode tomorrow. Believe me, if the end was near for Justin Trudeau, I would be the first one announcing it. But he's going to tenaciously cling to power. You know he will. So before I get into today's topic, which of course is CBC, you're saying, why would you talk about CBC right now? Because once you get into the news cycle, once you get into question period dictating what the top 5 stories of the day are, sometimes you overlook issues and episodes that you really mean to do and policies that you need to address. And defunding CBC is a big one. But before I get into that, I want to share a couple of comments from yesterday. I did that broadcast yesterday about Trudeau's vacation. How his plane broke down in Jamaica. He was staying at this lavish luxury resort on the water that just happened to be a former slave plantation. So I got a great comment from at Joe Knox 2108. And he said, heard this place was a plantation at one time. Wonder if he, Trudeau, did blackface again. I love that. I just love that. I wonder too, because it would be so apropos for someone like Trudeau who has no sense of appropriateness, does he? Or no sense of decorum or no sense of decency. He did blackface most of his adult life from a teenager on to God knows when he really stopped. He won't say. He can't even remember how many videos he recorded, let alone how many times he did it without a camera present. Got away with it. And yet he continues to castigate his political enemies as a bunch of racists. Who's the racist? Who's the guy who did blackface? Did he do it in Jamaica at a former slave plantation? Wouldn't put it past him. I don't know. But that was one of the funniest remarks. The other great remark I had yesterday, I mentioned the Online Safety Act, which is Trudeau's third censorship legislation. It's the third part of his censorship trilogy to clamp down on online news and to censor what people can say on the internet. And the Online Censorship Act, the Online Safety Act is going to outlaw disinformation and misinformation and malinformation without defining what these terms even mean and defining what kind of news is going to contravene it. So meaning everybody who says something Justin doesn't like is going to be guilty of it. So that's key. We defeat this legislation this year in whatever way we can in a parliamentary legal manner, obviously. But we need to convince enough MPs in the opposition to not support this legislation because it's bad for free speech. But anyway, I got a great remark here from Dirty Dog 995, who says the Online Safety Act should be where politicians are not allowed online. We'd be a lot safer, yeah, if politicians in general were not allowed online, especially the ones in this Trudeau government. So thank you for your comments. We're still going up and up with the comments on that. I'm trying to address and respond to as many as I can, and I just really am thankful that you're taking the time and the effort, and you're making the effort to comment on the show, because I appreciate anything you say. Obviously, I love to hear the positive feedback. It's very important when you do a show like this. You need to know people are being edified by it. People are learning from it. It's helping people to understand the news and helping you to find a means to advance common sense policies in this country and how to fight the nonsensical policies of the Trudeau government. I think that's one of the reasons I'm here, because I can say and do what I want to a certain degree, obviously. But it's very important you continue to tell me what you want me to say, what you want me to do, what you want me to discuss, because I think that's part of this process. It's a discourse. It's a discourse. So why are we talking about the CBC? Well, like I said, it's probably something that I'm not going to discuss. I did a story a couple weeks back for the Post Millennial. There she is, the president and CEO of CBC, Catherine Tate. Now, that's quite a picture, yes. And I'm not going to make any remarks about Catherine Tate's demeanor here or anything else. Clearly, she is a member of the Trudeau elite. She was put there by Justin Trudeau for a reason, which is to keep CBC sucking up your taxpayer money and really to be an organization that mouths Trudeau's policies. Occasionally, they do some good work. Occasionally, they do. But they are state media, and obviously and ultimately, they are beholden to Justin Trudeau. So what does the headline say here? CBC president to appear before Heritage Committee to explain job cuts and bonuses for executives. Yes, huge job cuts at CBC. And really no explanation as to how a crown corporation that receives $1.3 to $1.4 billion a year has to cut all of these positions. And it's absolutely astounding. And at the same time, keep the Christmas bonuses going for the executives. Where does all the money go at CBC? How is it blown? It's blown because they have the highest priced senior executive in media in North America. And they continue to get their Christmas bonuses, even though they've got huge job cuts. I mean, huge job cuts. And yet, hey, that's no big deal. That's no big deal here. So I show you that story, and I want to go to a little clip here from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre.
Bring this guy up on stage. Come on. Come on, get him up here. Somebody help him down. Whoa! Let's go. Come on over over here. Come on, buddy. Everybody, give this young guy a round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we might have another future prime minister here. What's your name? Xander? Xander, good to meet you. What do you think about defunding the CBC? Good idea? I can't get a yes or no answer from the Liberals, but Xander...
Now, I put that there because Pierre Poilievre made defunding the CBC a very important part of his leadership campaign when he was running to be the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. And I think he needs to follow through on that when he becomes prime minister. Now, why do I say there's any doubt about that? I just mentioned the fact that Catherine Tate is cutting 600 jobs at CBC because they just can't afford it anymore, and 200 more jobs on the horizon. Now, Pierre Poilievre has even joked about the fact he's going to turn the CBC's Ottawa headquarters into low-income housing. He needs to follow through in this. And why do I think there's a possibility he won't? I believe he's sincere about this, but what happened under 9 years of the Stephen Harper government? I wrote a policy paper in the midst of those 9 years. It was called Time to Leave Home, a case for the privatization of the CBC. And I argued not only that it was tendentiously left-wing in its politics, that it had an obvious bias, that it generally sided with liberal policies, even when the Liberals weren't in power, because they thought the Conservatives would not ever cut them too drastically and certainly never defund them. So I took this policy paper to various high-profile members of the Conservative government at the time, including cabinet ministers. And I said, this is a great idea. And I said, this paper will tell you how you can justify it beyond just saying we don't like the CBC and we don't like its left-wing analysis of the news. It's time for the CBC to function as any other media broadcaster, to go their own way, to stop feeding on the public trough, to stop taking from taxpayers, to stop being tethered to the federal government and receiving billions of dollars. Because it's just good for the economy and it's good for freedom of speech and freedom of the press in this country. We don't need a state broadcaster. The original reason for the CBC, because it was instituted by a conservative government in 1935 under R.B. Bennett, a conservative government. The rationale was that we needed Canadian content because we were immersed in American news and American entertainment, and we needed to provide unique Canadian content. That argument disappeared decades ago with the advent of super cable news. And now with the internet, there's no need for a state broadcaster to provide Canadian content. I'm providing Canadian content. My peers are providing Canadian content. There's dozens of stations on satellite TV that are providing Canadian content. Cable news and cable stations provide loads of Canadian content. So the rationale has disappeared. They don't need it. They have to survive on their own. They have to do this because it just makes sense. There's no need for you and I to continue to subsidize them. And it just provides a bad example for other media, which, of course, Trudeau has also put on the government payroll. And he's spending tens of millions of dollars to subsidize the legacy media, obviously in the hopes and the realization that they will provide positive media coverage for him. And that's exactly what happens. Media becomes beholden to the government if the government pays its bills. I believe there's enough good journalists at CBC who could probably make that station work quite effectively without 1.3 to 1.4 billion dollars a year from taxpayers. And if they can't, too bad. Other stations have to function in the real world. Let's listen to Catherine Tate, the president of who is really a gift, a godsend to Pierre Poilievre, because she exemplifies everything that's wrong with the CBC, everything that's wrong with the government buying the news. She's an elitist, and she really believes we can't function without the CBC.
To this point?
You know, we're not immune. CBC Radio-Canada has the enormous privilege of public funding. It's something that we are grateful for. And we also have different obligations than our private sector colleagues. We serve minority language communities in areas outside of Quebec for francophones. We're in the north. These are markets that will never be commercially viable, but it's important work and it's absolutely core to our mission. But we also have the same pressures with respect to inflation, cost of production, cost of operations, declines in revenue related to our traditional television services. All of that has created a perfect storm, and the pressure, the unbelievably fierce competition from the foreign streamers that accelerated and was amplified coming out during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic.
Sounds like something that's spread very thin.
We are enormously spread thin. I mean, it's just incredible. This organization has the same budget that it had 30 years ago.
Do you buy that for a minute? They haven't had an increase in their budget in 30 years. That is completely a complete falsehood. Of course, they've had increases in their budget in the last 30 years. And what makes CBC so unique, so singular, that they can't deal with the economic forces around them, but other companies are expected to do so. They have got an immediate $1.3 billion cash infusion. Plus, they run paid advertising on the television side of CBC. They're getting money from government and private sources, and yet it's just too much. Time to get rid of your bloated executive at the very least. Time to stop paying people 3 times the average wage that they would receive in the private sector. But even better, it's time to cut off your funding altogether and to say, go it alone or don't go at all.
I'm just curious about something. I'm going to presume no bonuses this year. I mean, the Canadian Taxpayer Federation said a Freedom of Information request showed 16 million were paid in bonuses in 2022. Can we establish that that is not happening this year?
It's too early to say where we are for this year. We'll be looking at that like we do all our line items in the coming months.
So there's a chance bonuses could still happen at a time when jobs are being cut?
I'm not going to comment on something that hasn't been discussed at this point, so.
Okay. Well, detractors.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on that because, yeah, it's probably going to happen. And yes, it is absolutely outrageous that she would tell CBC journalists that, you know, we really don't want to cut those bonuses because, ooh, you know, that's not like CBC. So I'm not going to give you an answer. I'm going to give you talking points, just like Justin Trudeau does. I'm going to be evasive, just like the Liberal government expects me to be. So that's an old friend of mine asking the questions. Adrienne Arsenault, what do I know Adrienne from? She used to come to my base in Comox, British Columbia, when I was the public affairs officer there. And she always came with a crew to my base to do stories about the operations we were doing, which is search and rescue, maritime patrol, fighter ops. And it was always a pleasure to deal with Adrienne. She was a good reporter, and she is a good reporter because she had the guts to at least ask that question to CBC's president. And you could see she was expecting a better answer than that. But Adrienne was a good reporter. I have fond memories of Adrienne being always willing to give national defense a fair shake and to give us fair coverage. I never asked for propaganda. I just said, be fair with us, Adrienne. And she always was. And we had a very good friendship in those days when I was at Comox. But it reminds me of CBC showing up at the gate with 4 people. And I used to say, how in the hell can you afford to send 4 people on a story? And it was indicative of how CBC loves to waste money. Because if I was doing a story with the local CTV station, they would send 1 journalist with a camera. He would ask me the questions, he would do the interview with his camera, and he would be responsible for the script and everything else. And unlike CBC that had somebody designated to buy the bagels, the private sector companies obviously couldn't afford that. So the CBC was always bloated in terms of its personnel and always had too many people assigned to every story because they had the luxury of doing that. So when you hear Catherine Tate go on about all the economic pressures and the forces, they have been wasting your money for decades because they assume it's going to keep coming. They have such a sense of entitlement. It is just like everything else that is feeding off the public trough. They think it's never going to end, and it never should end because they're so special in the work they do. But I respected Adrienne for those questions. I wanted to make that clear. I'm glad she did that. But it really is time to move on, folks. It's time, and Pierre Poilievre has got to follow through on this promise because it's integral. Stephen Harper refused to defund or seriously cut the CBC for 9 years. He was afraid to do it politically. God knows why. There's never been a more opportune time to defund the CBC. I think most Canadians would agree with it and applaud it heartily. And it's necessary not just to save $1 billion plus a year. It's necessary to save free speech and freedom of press in Canada because we've got to get rid of a state media and eliminate all subsidies to legacy media. Otherwise, journalists are in the pocket of the government, no matter what that government may be. I want to show one more clip here. Illustrates, I think, how arrogant the CBC can be. And this is the deputy conservative leader, Melissa Lantsman. I was quite hard on Melissa a couple of weeks back when she said she was going to write a blank check or that a conservative government should write a blank check to Ukraine to keep this war going for as long as it takes, and the mistaken idea that if we don't keep funding the black hole of Kiev, there's going to be a continued movement from Russia into Western Europe. We need to stop funding Ukraine, but I'm not going to say anything more about that today. I think on this occasion, Melissa was quite right on.
Chair, I would give the floor to Lantsman, please.
Madam Chair, Hamas itself admits that it uses terrorism to further its goals. Those facts are not disputed, and the choice not to call Hamas terrorists is willful obstruction of the facts. It is bias, and it does help Hamas. That said, your funding has increased 21%. Your ratings have dropped since 2016. The primetime ratings have dropped 7.6% since 2018. Trust is down 40%. That's a 60% distrust. I will never apologize for holding the CBC to account for $1.4 billion of taxpayer money that you receive. The NDP used to be an opposition party. They used to do that in committee. They used to do that in the House, and I will never apologize for that. But can you tell?
I'm sorry, Ms.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Ms. Lansman, your time is up. Good job, Melissa Lansman, exposing the CBC, telling everybody how much money they waste, and the fact their ratings are on the decline. Now, when the war in the Middle East in Gaza began, Catherine Tate made the editorial decision and gave the order in an internal memo telling reporters for CBC that they could not use the word terrorism or terrorist and apply that to Hamas. Now, I'm not enthusiastic about what Israel has done in Gaza since October 7th, any more than I wouldn't say it was a slaughter by terrorists against Israelis on October 7th. But the point is, you cannot tell reporters to use politically correct language based on what policy? Hamas is a terrorist organization. Hamas fighters are terrorists. That's a fact of life. And I wouldn't want to sugarcoat what is happening in Gaza right now by the Israelis by saying, oh, we can't be critical because, well, we just don't do that because we put political opinion and we put political language ahead of objective truth. And we don't want to report the events as they really are. So Lantzman made a very good point here. Don't tell reporters they can't refer to Hamas people as terrorists. Because once you start doing that, you politically define the war and you politically define anything that is news. But of course, CBC's been doing that for years, haven't they? Because you look at their coverage of conservative, small c conservative or libertarian events, and they're never important. They're never important. They're never on the radar. They always underestimate the amount of people. When we had the 1 million person march for children, they grossly underestimated or grossly lied about the amount of parental rights champions who are on the streets fighting against gender ideology. They did that intentionally because they were ideologically in tune with the whole LGBTQ agenda. And they were opposed to parents knowing about what their children are doing in schools. They are ideologically in tune with Justin Trudeau and his extremist social agenda. So we know how CBC operates, and as long as they keep getting the money, they'll keep telling the lies, and they'll keep underrepresenting events and numbers that are associated with small c conservative organizations or people. So it's very important we defund the CBC. I encourage Pierre Poilievre, follow through on this. Stephen Harper didn't have the guts to do it. 9 years he could have done it, and he didn't. The time is now. When you are Prime Minister, Mr. Poilievre, follow through on one of your paramount promises. Defund the CBC, save Canadian taxpayers $1.3 billion a year, and reinvigorate freedom of press and freedom of speech in this country by saying no more state media and get rid of those subsidies for legacy media as well. Glad we had a chance to talk about this today. I'll be back tomorrow with the news of the day. No more question period for another 4 weeks or so. But there's always news magically appearing after the Christmas and New Year break. And we'll be seeing a lot of news happening in the next couple of days and weeks, and I'll be following it and I'll be passing it on to you. And I'll be commenting on why it's important and where we're going. This is going to be a very, very pivotal year. And I keep saying it, and I'm going to say it one more time. We have to resolve to resist what the Trudeau government is doing to us. We have to convince enough opposition MPs that the Trudeau government needs to fall this year before it wreaks more damage on this country, before it causes a major
catastrophe from which we cannot recover. We need the Liberal government to fall this year, and we can do that through parliamentary means. We just need to convince MPs that it's for everybody's good, the national good as well as theirs. But we're going to keep fighting and giving you the news, reporting the issues, and letting you know what's important on Stand on Guard. Thanks for watching today. Happy rest of your Sunday. Snowing here in Ottawa. I got to go out and shovel some snow. But that's okay. We had a really good time for most of the Christmas and New Year's. Not a lot of shoveling going on here. For those of you who've had a lot of shoveling, my turn today. Thanks for watching again. We love you.